Pnti desperately want the restrictions lifted. They're tired of having to dodge video cameras now everywhere. Dash cams, doorbells, every stoplight you see. And so the number of cameras out in the public now that have a chance of catching them or their ships, along with the number of cameras set up within our homes now, through our computers, through security systems, has increased exponentially. And one of the employees under Tilcom came to him one day and said, "You really expect us to avoid all the dash cams everywhere that are constantly moving all the time in every country? How are we going to do that?" And so Tilcom basically said, well, try to not just buzz the local populace and be caught if you can help it. So many of the videos that you see of UFOs captured in the sky are of craft having a problem, where their focus was, we got to fix this technical problem that we're having, rather than, and it became more of a priority, than avoiding cameras at the time.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us on this very special show of Third Eye Salon. Of course, we have the amazing Linda Coulter-Burge with us today.
Hi, everyone.
And our special guest that we are bringing in here is Sue Walker, psychic medium and ET contactee and ally, Sue Walker. Hey, Sue.
Hello there. Thank you for having me.
It is a
wonderful
delight
to be here. I've been looking forward to this since we scheduled it, so I'm really excited.
Thank you. Same here.
We've both been very excited. Yeah.
I'm going to hop in and read Sue's bio, because I'm just itching to get into the conversation. And the bio is just like this little thumbnail sketch. So as a professional clairvoyant and medium intuitive, or medical intuitive, for nearly 3 decades, Sue Walker has been featured on both national and international television. She is a lifelong experiencer, and for the past 7 years has been translating for a group of extraterrestrials from Zeta Reticuli II, who operate out of a base beneath the Sandia Mountains on the eastern edge of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Sue assisted in the first known collaboration with the Pnti on a basic training manual, the Telepathy 101 Primer. Sue co-authored Inviting ET, along with her spouse, Reverend White Otter. Mm-hmm. So even that is so chock full, because I didn't know that you were a lifelong ET experiencer.
Since I was 3.5 to 4.
Wow.
The very first ET I recall was watching a reptilian vanish into a wall at my grandmother's house in New York State, not far from Niagara Falls. And then fast forward to first grade-ish, which would have been 2-3 years later, I definitely remember being very frightened at that point in time about the short, large-eyed extraterrestrials that came out of the closet.
Now, were they the classic gray type that people talk about with the...
They were the classic gray physiology of larger head, large dark eyes with the UV lenses. By the way, those dark eyes, what look like black eyes, mm-hmm. is actually a second eyelid, similar to some species here on Earth, like birds and reptiles, who have a second eyelid. And when it retracts, their eyes are beautiful colors, absolutely stunning, huge, gorgeous irises.
I have heard that. I love hearing you say that, because so many people are freaked out by the black eyes, but it's literally an organic lens that is for protection and for filtering. And
we call it their built-in sunglasses.
That is great. And so just to kind of segue, because there's so much that we want to get into with the Pnti, and Linda's got stacks on stacks of questions for us to explore today.
Okay.
Many questions.
And I'm so wondering, what was the transition? Because was it, so did it feel like a negative experience with the reptilian and the grays? Was that, those are not who you're connecting with now. That's a different species entirely. So what was
Well, all right. So the transition for me, as I remember childhood, I had some interactions then, but I had in 1998, 20 years ago, 22 years ago now, a very concentrated period of time where I witnessed a UFO, and then 10 days later had a visit by one of the tall, creamy white beings that look like the Zeta body type, only stretched to be about 8 feet tall. And then 10 days after that, I had 4 Pnti at the foot of my bed. And then it was a year after that that I met a Reptarian on board a ship. I woke up on board the ship and managed to get this individual's name.
And how old were you?
Those conscious experiences, because they were on and off and on and off until then. Those conscious experiences were 20 plus years ago. So I would have been late 30s, early 40s at that point in time.
Was this kind of a handoff where like you had been initiated into the ET contact experience and they're like, okay, now it's for the Pnti to pick up. We're going to give you the contact experience, and now this is your new tribe, or what was?
Well, I think what happened is when I started having those conscious experiences, and they were frequent, they were a number of times a month, back in 98, 99, up until about 2002. It was very, very regular. And for the first year and a half of that time frame, I would wake up in the backyard with my pajamas on. I can't tell you how many ships I saw leaving, more than I could count now, various vessel types. And during that whole time, I begged for them to answer me back. I said, I cannot help you if we cannot communicate both ways. Because up until that time, usually I had been given either a screen memory or been shut off and woke up watching them leave, or woke up sitting in bed with my pajamas on backwards, or something else that would tell me this was a UFO kind of night. It wasn't until I met the Reptarian on board ship that the actual back and forth conversation dialogue first began. And then when I moved or came to visit Otter at his home here in New Mexico for the very first time in 2013, I did not expect to connect with anything ET related down here at all. In fact, I was a little afraid that my experiences would bring that UFO kind of night activity to Otter's home. I didn't know at that point in time that he was also an experiencer from very early on, starting about age 10. So
I wanted to ask this real quick, though. I have got to find out about the Reptarian. I'm like,
yeah.
What's, like, tell me more. I got to hear about that.
Okay. So a lot of individuals who have ET contactee experiences have reported a negative interaction with reptilian type body type beings. The Reptarians are the individuals whose heritage back millions of years ago started here on this planet, and not, let's say, into the constellation of Draco around one of those star systems. So the Reptarian that I met on board the craft, I was following a group of Earth human individuals who were following one of the Pnti. And they all went around the corner, and I was the last one in the group, got to the middle of the room, and suddenly realized where I was, and I stopped dead. And I looked around, and I put my hands on my hips, and I said, would somebody please tell me what the heck is going on here? I mean, honest to God. So the rest of the Earth humans left the room still following the Pnti, and here I am alone in the middle of the room. The whole room is backlit with red. I see Pnti at workstations around the edges of the walls, and a Reptarian steps forward toward me, and he was about my height and looked like a slight variation on a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Okay.
It was a snoutish sort of face.
Mm-hmm.
It was dark chocolate brown leather skin.
Mm-hmm.
And he stepped forward and introduced himself. And that was 1.5 years after me asking for somebody to please respond to me. I was so thrilled that somebody finally talked back to me.
Yeah.
That I went and hugged him. And so I got a feel of what it was like to touch his back with that supple leather living skin.
Yeah.
And it was not cold. It was not cold. And his feel was not negative in any way, shape, or form.
He's like he's
quite the opposite.
Right. I mean, I'm tuning into it as you're talking about it, and like because he's indigenous. He's
Yes.
like as much as an Earthling as you and I,
That's right.
or your cat or anybody is. He's an Earthling.
Mm-hmm. Very kind, very intelligent. Clearly one of the individuals in command of this particular ship. And clearly the Pnti were voluntarily working with this individual. Now, I did not see other star nations other than the Reptarian and the Pnti on that ship. Those are the only two that I can, and all of my memories, none of them have come from hypnosis. They're all conscious remembering from being awake.
I was just going to ask you, in the state of being that you were there, did it feel at all dreamlike, or was it absolute clarity?
Absolutely clear and real. I could draw for you everything that I saw in detail, because my alert system was very high, because I realized immediately where I was and went, holy crap. So
from your experience, I'm interested. I've had experiences as a child where I'm not quite sure what happened. I had out-of-body experience after seeing something in the clouds, looking down at myself.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen 2 different UFOs. One of them, I remember my husband in the next room yelling at him, trying to get his attention. And I always wondered if in the other room he was whisked away. But I'm starting to wonder if I was whisked away, because he never heard me yelling at him. Never heard me yelling at the top of my lungs at him. And so, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to, my question was, how many people do you think that a lot of people are in my situation where maybe they don't remember what has happened? And is there a way to
change that? Yes.
Have more of that conscious? Is that part of what you're teaching?
That's part of it. What we do know is that telepathic nations, like the Pnti, have a skill set that we have not learned yet, and that is to alter the brainwave activity of another individual. What they do when they visit us is drop down the speed of our brainwave activity to take us from normal everyday waking consciousness down into a slower alpha theta than theta state. And so alpha theta is like a light sleep, It's like when you do a guided meditation, you head down into that slower brainwave territory and into an alpha state. And when you borderline on alpha theta, that's when your brain chemistry shifts enough that if you start to dream, you don't act out your dream because your body's voluntary muscles have been given the instruction to not react to what's going on in your head. Okay, so that's why we don't run away normally in our dreams or fight somebody with our hands for real as we're sleeping. That shutdown, that slower brainwave activity does two things. It allows the Pnti to interact with us in a clearer fashion for us as Earth humans, because that's when our telepathic rapport with them is the very strongest in that alpha theta state. When they visit us at our homes or wherever we happen to be, the Pnti have protocols that they must follow in order to do that interaction with us. And the first one is cause no fear. The second one is do no harm. And the third protocol is leave no trace. So dropping us into that alpha theta state allows them to have a greater ability to protect themselves and us in an interaction situation, because we don't panic and go into that adrenaline fight or flight the same way in that alpha theta state as we do in normal beta level waking state of consciousness. So it helps them stay with their own visiting us protocols. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask, because I want to back up a little bit, because I'm going to include Karen Swain's interview with you in the information below, because you guys just had such a blast, and the content's great, and so I want people to be able to catch that. And,
we had fun.
And I still want our people who are tuning in for the first time, and this is, you know, their first chance to meet you, to know like who the Pnti are, what their intentions are. Like, I understand that they're kind of, you know, they've got a certain genre that is theirs in the Star Federation. Like, everyone has their projects they're working on, and they have a certain project that is theirs, and it's more of the cultural, social aspect. So, correct. And I know that, you know, you started to encounter them telepathically when you're hanging out with Otter. You were having this telepathic exchange and being like, oh, this is what's happening. And you were like, okay, well, Otter, do you know about? And he's like, oh yeah, they talk to me all the time. And so you guys both had this like immediately friendly rapport with them, because you're both experiencers.
Immediately.
It's not shocking.
Right. No, it took me a long time to get over the fear. And by the time I'd come to visit Otter in New Mexico, I had gotten over the vast majority of my fear of that Zeta physiology body type. Mm-hmm. And gotten used to the idea, and I knew coming to New Mexico from Iowa that I was coming into the land of Roswell and mysterious secret programs that happen underground here. And so even with that, I didn't expect to have any kind of happening when I came to visit Otter. And the Pnti contacted us. The Pnti, for those of you who do not know, are a Zeta body type. This is the individual who first contacted me in 2013 out of the blue. And at the time when he first contacted me, I did not know his name. I knew that his voice and his presence was from underneath the Sandia mountain on the eastern edge of Albuquerque. And because the location of where the voice was coming from was the Sandia mountain, I decided to nickname him Sandia only because it sounded like a person's name. It was better than calling him the voice from the mountain. So it wasn't until 2 months later that he told me what his real name was and where home was. And his real name is Teal'c, and home is the fifth planet orbiting the further of the two stars in the binary star system of Zeta Reticuli, about 40 light years from here. He manages the information station, which is under the mountain. And so, yes, they are cultural explorers. They have a sense of humor very similar to ours, very intelligent people. Every one of them has a different personality type, just like us. And we spent a year and a half getting to know Teal'c before he ever introduced us to anybody else that he was working with. And so we got to know this guy quite well.
And you said they've got different, obviously different personality types. And do you really distinctly hear the differences in their voices when they're talking to you?
Oh, very much. Just like if one of your best friend calls you up on the phone, you tend to recognize their voice. When somebody else calls you, you recognize a different voice. And so we got to know the Pnti by their voice and what I'm going to call their emotional energy signature, because you get both the voice, but you also get a sense of male, female, a little bit about the emotional mood that they're in, sometimes images about what it is that they're sharing with you or talking about. And so it's not like hearing a radio going off in your head. It is much more emotional, visual, auditory, history, and a larger package of information, all simultaneously, than just auditory.
That's remarkable.
I had this off-the-wall question that popped in my head. Do they have different accents, like we have different accents here?
Slightly, because not all of the Pnti grew up on their home planet. They've been exploring this part of the galaxy for a long, long time, and are willing to share maps with us after official first contact of all different kinds. But because they did not all grow up on the same home planet, they do have slightly different accents. We do see them using slightly different words or phrases from one another. Mm-hmm. We see them borrowing our phrases a lot now. But more than anything, we got to know them as people. And one of the very first things that Teal'c expressed to us very, very early on was that they are human too. We are Earth human. They are Zeta Reticuli human.
Human. Yeah. And that kind
There's a lot of variations on the theme, Kat. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and that brings us into, they're sort of, they're cultural ambassadors, but they're also cultural scientists.
That's right.
Yeah. So they're here they want to know, like, that is their jam, so to speak, is that they're like, we really want to understand your culture, because that's part of what our project is to bridge this barrier and get everyone to be on the same page so that we are, reacting and responding to each other that's in ways that are respectful, mindful, purposeful. And it brings us into one of the first questions we have for you is how do they see us? Do they see us as one big cosmic family, or do they see us as cousins? How do they want us to see them and perceive them?
I think your word cousins is apropos here, because one of the things that Teal'c taught us within that first 6 months is that their belief system tells them that everyone is related. No matter if they have a Zeta body type, an Earth human body type, a Reptarian body type, whatever it is, in some fashion, all of us across the galaxy and the universe, so to speak, are related. And so when you meet another person that is new to you, to honor the concept that we're all related, Joachim said we refer to others as cousins, even though they're not our biological cousins. The translation for some of the greetings is, "Hey, cuz, how are you?" And it's that way because it's an honoring of, I recognize I'm related to you, and we're family together. So they do consider that as a dominant part of their understanding of all these other star nations across this galaxy and beyond that, is that in some fashion we're all related and distant cousins. So cuz is a good term.
It's great. When you said, "Hey, cuz," I'm thinking of all the times I've gone to the reservations throughout my childhood, and that was a common greeting.
Yes, right. I do believe that. At least I know that some of the Native American tribes here in North America have that same concept underlying their traditions and culture as well. I didn't know how prevalently it was used, but I had heard that was something that at least somebody was talking to me about the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota nations, and that was a belief that they held. I have not ever asked the Pueblo people down here, though.
Interesting.
Good question.
Yeah, I was curious because I spent a lot of time on the Navajo reservations and some Zuni, Hopi reservations, and it's about 300 miles from Sandia to the San Francisco peaks, where the Hopi believe that the Kajinas come from. And I'm really curious if you haven't had that conversation, but what your thoughts might be of, is there a relationship there?
Oh, yes. Oh, very much. One of our good friends, and we feel very honored to have gotten to know him quite well, is a Zuni elder, one of the last members of the Zuni tribe who still speaks ancient Zuni, not modern Zuni, and was taught as a boy hours upon hours upon hours upon hours of memorized prayers used in their ceremonies in ancient Zuni. And that Zuni elder is Clifford Mahuti, who is in his mid-70s now. And Clifford is quite literally a living treasure. He was trained in the Galaxy Society portion of the medicine orders. And so as a boy, he and his group were trained in the history of interaction with the sky peoples, the Star Brothers. He's the one who shared with us and continues to share with us a lot of the information about the Pueblo peoples, and especially the Zunis, interaction with the star nations over time. And we're not talking about distant past here. We're talking ongoing interactions. And so he and I have had discussions about the Navajo and the Hopi and the Zuni and the interactions that those nations have, along with the Four Corners, along with Second Mesa, along with the flight path around the Zuni Pueblo itself. And in fact, I'm currently doing the final editing of a YouTube video that will go up very shortly. I'm at the closed caption editing portion of it, and then we'll post it. Clifford and his brother and another gal had a CE6, not a CE5, a CE6. And a CE5, CE, let me back up.
Explain.
CE stands for Close Encounter. All right, so you've heard of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So close encounter of the third kind is I believe I see a being associated with a UFO. That's the classic definition of a CE3, close encounter of the third kind. A CE5, which is what we teach in our book, Inviting ET, is a voluntary back and forth dialogue with an occupant of a UFO, whether that being is live, mechanical, part mechanical. It's associated with UFO that makes it a CE5. A CE6 is voluntary action taken with that occupant of a UFO. And in Clifford's case, he got into a vehicle and was taken for a ride in what turned out to be a craft driven by extraterrestrials. And the story that I'm editing is called Clifford's UFO Taxi Ride. I kid you not, he was outside of Zuni, and he and his brother's girlfriend saw a UFO. Their car died. They were standing in the middle of the road trying to get a ride into town still because it was freezing out, scared because the UFO was on the ground and they saw a tube come out of it and beings. And a car comes very slowly down the same road that their car died on. It never stops, but they hop in. And it turns out that the driver and the passenger of that vehicle, which was not a taxi, was not a car, drove them down to Zuni, never stopped for stop signs, never stopped for the stoplight, turned a corner, headed straight for Clifford and his brother's mom's house. And as soon as they got in front of that house at 3 miles an hour, they all bailed out of the car, rolled on the ground, ran into his mom's house. And then everybody that was within that house came out. By then, the UFO was hovering over that house.
Wow.
So not only did we have 3 people interact and get a ride with ETs, but others saw the craft afterwards as well. So very, very documented, corroborated encounter. And the only CE6 story that I know of that involves 3 witnesses who all got a ride in the UFO taxi.
Wow.
Wow.
I want to hop in because I know that when people hear these stories, oftentimes they're like, well, I wouldn't have been afraid. I would have just said, hey, let's go for it. You know, like they have this disassociated connection to an experience because it's in their fantasy. And in your fantasy, you can control things, right? In your fantasy, you're the one in charge. But when you energetically encounter a being from another planet, the frequency and vibration is so different from the human frequency and vibration. You go into fight or flight. You don't mean to. It just happens.
No, it just happens.
On that to educate people a little bit.
We tell people just plan on being overwhelmed. Just plan on it. Okay, that's just it's 99% of the people who have an interaction that's dramatic. Sometimes, either immediately, hours later, or days later, will have an incredible overwhelm response. Linda, you said something about the Hopi and the Second Mesa and Kachinas. One of the things that Clifford taught us is that the vast majority of the Kachina doll images that you see represent star nations, not fictitious or legendary or mythological beings. They represent what the Zuni or the Hopi remember of a real life in front of you interaction with a star nation or star nation beings.
I know when I was there, when we had discussions, they were like, oh yeah, them. Yeah, yeah, we see them all the time. Oh yeah. It was just no big deal.
No, very common. Very common.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Kat.
It's so hard not to just
I can
I'm
see.
just like a
I know, we just want to
child.
jump on each other talking.
I'm trying very hard to not interrupt you guys and having to bite my tongue. All right, Kat, we're going to give you the talking stick.
It's just like, this is like, oh, this is so rich for me. So one of our questions was, because there's this continuum of species, like we are so myopic in our human experience of like, this is what's happening. And beyond this little teeny tiny tunnel vision we have are all these species, all these beings, all these star nations who've just been here and been here and been here way before we can even conceive. And so
Absolutely.
we were wondering, like, what is your experience of the ones who are negatively aligned, who are in service to self, and how do you experience them, and how do the Pnti experience them? Because there are people who are, or beings who are doing interference, wanting to keep the frequency down. They have their own agenda, but this creates a pressure cooker. This creates an environment where, wow, can you learn spiritual lessons like up the wazoo that you could never learn anywhere else because of the dichotomy, because of the contrast. So it's a rich training ground, but also in the experience, it can be just overwhelming and so frustrating when you're the human trying to like ascend and you're like, oh, but it's so dense and heavy here. So bringing back down to the question, how do you and the Pnti encounter, experience, and deal with like negative entities who are here for the oppression and here for the control?
Well, all right. So thankfully, the Pnti are allied with nations that are right-minded instead of wrong-minded. And right-minded is considerate, polite, thinking far into the future of consequences of actions, making sure that your actions positively affect 7 generations into the future.
Wow.
I mean, there are a variety of things that fall in line under the idea of right-mindedness. The wrong-minded are the self-serving that you're speaking of. And we do know that there are some here on Earth, even though Tilcum has stated that we are in protected planet status. Every once in a while, they still sneak in. We do know that they tend to congregate together places. And what do I mean by that? There are some locations on our world where it's much easier to travel and shift into a multi-dimensional space. Go through a portal, if you will, okay? And those locations, just like exit ramps on an interstate, can lead you to very positive places, or they can lead you to business places, or they can lead you to downtown or the library. But some of the portals being used that are public portals that anybody can use tend to be a conglomeration of negative ETs or multidimensional beings rather than positive. And let me give you a for instance. Skinwalker Ranch has a portal that is being used by self-serving individuals. There are some areas up by the Four Corners that have some rather seedy individuals. Down here, some of the places down in the Gila Mountains have a negative portal. Some of the area of Arizona in the southern stretch of mountains there. So there are pockets of not so nice peoples from places other than Earth. Do the Pnti interact with them? Not much unless they have to.
Fair.
True story. And do they tell us about them on an as-needed basis? Yes.
Okay. Do you think that so in your interview with Karen, you talked about the Pnti having a moratorium on not being photographed for a period of time. They have a contract. Is that it? Or a
There's
treaty?
a treaty. There's a signed
treaty.
treaty, right? What Tilcom told us, what this guy told us, is that back in the late 40s, there was essentially an agreement made with then President Eisenhower. And Eisenhower had made the determination that Earth was not yet ready to meet its relatives from the stars, that there was still too much fear. We had just 10 years before that come off of the Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio broadcast. And he was remembering that and some other things. So they requested time and more than one generation of time. Fast forward from the late 40s to about 1971, there was a meeting of a number of star nations and a number of representatives here from Earth that met in a desert location that was not North America. I have images of it. I suspect it was in the Middle East somewhere, but I don't know that for sure. And it was not near anything that indicated there was an easy access via roads. They had to bring in generators for electricity. But that desert accord is the treaty that they signed that indicated that they would not share technology. They would not share photos or videos of themselves. And that treaty ends its 50 years, August of 2021. Wow. So it was signed in 1971, and exactly 50 years later is when it ends. And so we're waiting until that point in time. What Tilcom told me is, we can't provide you with photos. We can't provide you with videos. But there's nothing in the treaty that stops a contactee or experiencer from drawing what they've seen. And so it was Tilcom's request for me in 2014, I think it was. And I began drawing for the first time in 40 years. I had not drawn anything in 4 decades. And I started drawing the Pnti that we'd met. And they helped me improve my art skills from then until now. So my art teachers, the only art teachers I've ever had, have been Pnti.
How did they help you improve your skills? Like, did they just like?
I will do a rough draft in black and white, and then I will set out the rough draft for them to have time to study. And I started setting it out on the easel in my studio, and they would come inspect it and then inform me the next day what needed to be changed and how. Okay. And slowly began teaching me to refine the details that I observed, as well as refine my skill set with light and shadow. And so very slowly but steadily, we talked about their physiology, what they look, their anatomy, and how to get it more accurate. And so I just started taking art lessons from the Pnti by listening to their feedback after I started the first rough draft. And subsequently there would be other rough drafts in black and white until they were satisfied. And then if they wanted color added, then we went to that next step and did a rough draft in color and then refined that. So very slowly but steadily, I found out skin tone shades, details about their fingers and their feet, details about their physiology and anatomy, because as I drew them, you naturally think about the bone structure under the skin and wonder about, gee, how is this different? And so you have conversations with the individuals that you're doing a sketch up. And that was an easy way for us to learn, is just conversation back and forth with whomever I was working to do the next sketch up.
That's amazing.
So I have a question. Do you think in 2021 there will be an effort to clamp down on that again? Or do you think that that will be a point of reset where we actually have the
permission?
The
Really?
Pnti desperately want the restrictions lifted. They're tired of having to dodge video cameras now everywhere. Dash cams, doorbells, every stoplight you see. And so the number of cameras out in the public now that have a chance of catching them or their ships, along with the number of cameras set up within our homes now, through our computers, through security systems, has increased exponentially. And one of the employees under Tilcom came to him one day and said, "You really expect us to avoid all the dash cams everywhere that are constantly moving all the time in every country? How are we going to do that?" And so Tilcom basically said, well, try to not just buzz the local populace and be caught if you can help it. So many of the videos that you see of UFOs captured in the sky are of craft having a problem, where their focus was, we got to fix this technical problem that we're having, rather than, and it became more of a priority than avoiding cameras at the time.
Well, and that hops into a question where about their technology, because my understanding is that technology and spirituality are connected, you know, and in our dimension and our density, they're not as connected. Obviously, we're, you know, technology is really rudimentary in comparison. So I'm just looking for clarification, because, you know, we have these ideas about how it works, right? Like, oh, well, they can just turn themselves invisible because they have they're spiritually advanced, or they have the technology. And we tend to fill in the blanks. And it's like, well, how does it actually work from their point of view?
All right. So are there...
Oh no, what happened? I will tell you what happened. Our conversation with Sue Walker ran on so long, we had to put it into 2 videos. So this, what you just watched, is part 1, and I've left you on a little bit of a teaser to invite you to part 2, which will happen next week. So stay tuned, stay subscribed if you haven't already. Click that notification bell, share with your friends, and please leave comments. The more that you engage, the better we are able to reach more people. So thank you, and we'll see you next week.